And then we'll do this. All right, good morning. My name is Beau Rogers, and I'm here with Creation Ministries International, or CMI for short. Pastor Aaron, thank you very much for allowing us to come into your house or your place of worship today. So I've already had this a couple times. What is Creation Ministries International? Well, we're a unique organization. We're a donor-based apologetics ministry. Now, I am not here to teach you guys how to apologize. Husbands, we should already be good at that. Now, this is an apologetics ministry, and that means that we're defending the faith with logical and credible answers, sometimes to some very, very tough questions. Now, Creation Ministries International specifically, our mission is to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ, equip believers to defend the authority of the Bible with specific emphasis on the Genesis account. Now, we have offices in 7 different countries, and we have more PhD scientists, Bible-based PhD scientists, than any other organization that we're aware of. I know it's Sunday morning. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but how many of you have encountered some of these tough questions when you were sharing your faith? I'm not going to list all of them, but just a few. Why would a loving God allow so much death and suffering? Did God really create in just 6 days? Where do dinosaurs fit in the Bible? And why should I believe the Bible if we all know that evolution is a scientific fact? Now, if your son or grandson came home from church, or school rather, and had asked you these questions, would you be able to give them a confident answer? Well, that's what I'm here for. CMI speakers visit over 1,200 churches annually and give presentations like this. I'm here today to give you just a taste of the wealth of information that is available at CMI to help you answer these very tough questions. So a little bit about me. I'm a bit of a science nerd and an adrenaline junkie. I went to college at the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. When there, I was a skydiving instructor, and I graduated with an aeronautical engineering degree. I had a 23-year active duty Air Force career flying F-16s. I did 8 combat deployments, and I was a Top Gun instructor and a graduate. I retired in 2016, and now I am trying not to spill the coffee. I'm a Delta captain, but I still like to have some fun, so on the side, I am a Porsche driving coach. Now, honestly, none of that really matters. What's most important is I'm a Christian, I'm a husband to my wife of 25 years, and we have 2 amazing boys who are in college. They're 19 and 21 years old. Now, I've done a lot of fun things, but honestly, being up here in front of you guys today, this is what gets me most excited. I am also a little concerned about the statistics of our youth who are leaving the church. So the Barna Institute did a confidential survey of teens, and they found that 64%, nearly 2/3, plan on leaving the church after they leave the house. When asked what the greatest oppositions to accepting or maintaining the Christian faith, their response was 1, that science refutes the Bible, and the second is the refusal to believe in fairy tales that are in the Bible. You see, this idea of evolution, it is the major influence affecting today's youth. Now, at Creation Ministries International, we went out and did our own study on this very subject. We sent a film crew to universities, and we asked students as they walked by, and so we got 100 students who all said that they grew up in the church. And then we had 2 follow-up questions for them. We asked them, have you heard of the scientific evidence for biblical creation? And the second question was, are you still attending church today? Now, 95 of the students said, what are you talking about? I've never heard about science in the Bible. And of those 95 students, only 1 was still attending church. We had 5 students who said, oh yeah, I know about creation, and all 5 of those students are still attending. So while overall the numbers are bad, it's actually a little bit, it is promising of the correlation of those who know about creation and who are maintaining their faith even after they leave the house. So I want to read this, 1 Peter 3:15. It says, but in your hearts Honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. Now, is this a suggestion? Is this a good idea? Or is this a command? Now, that's right, it's a command. We need to have a defense and be able to make a defense for our faith. So, would we deploy our young pilots into physical combat if they didn't have the right training? Does that sound like a good idea to anybody? No, of course not. But are we prepared to do spiritual battle? Think about that. You know, I grew up as a Boy Scout and our motto was be prepared. And then later when I was in the fighter squadron, we said that we fight like we train, so train well. Well, similarly, Creation Ministries International is about preparing and equipping you with the tools to defend your faith. Now, if you have a question about creation, where can you find us? Now, this is pretty easy. A creation question, go to creation.com. You may want to write that down. I know it's pretty hard, and there will be a test at the end. So next time you encounter a tough question, check out our website, type it in. It's very possible that the answer is already there. We have over 40 years of creation research on the website and over 14,000 articles. Again, most likely your question has already been answered. Now, you can also take us with you. We have a weekly free email newsletter called Creation Info Bites. It's a great way to be a part of our ministry and stay up to date on the latest biblical information on science and God's creation. Now in the news, they may have said, we found the missing link that proves evolution. Well, these info bites will come out and we may have an article that already refutes that new piece of news. It's also a great evangelism tool. Simply forward info bites to your families and friends. So I'd like to ask our volunteers to please circulate these sign-up sheets. Just make sure that your email is nice and legible. And while these sign-up sheets are making the rounds, I'll tell you a little bit about my background. Now this may surprise you, but I'm pretty representative of today's youth. So as a kid, I went to church and Sunday school. I learned about how God created everything in 6 days, and I heard all the Bible stories. But just like the research revealed, the teachings I got on Sunday were no match for the facts and science that I got Monday through Friday. When the Bible and my science didn't match, I just assumed that the textbooks had it right. I was nearly a statistic. But in my teens, the gospel message was compelling and I became a Christian. But I still held on to these deep time evolutionary beliefs, despite what the Bible clearly says. So does this resonate with anyone here? Have you heard the idea that God created the universe via the Big Bang 13 million years ago? And then he guided the evolutionary process, and that's where we are today. Okay, this is called theistic evolution, and that was me for decades. And I will tell you, it does not work. The problem is that the Bible does not leave any room for millions of years. And I figured that with more studying, I would eventually figure it out, but I never came across the answers. Until, after I retired from the Air Force, I was able to get in touch with Creation Ministries International and their resources, and now I can confidently say that the Bible is trustworthy from beginning to end. It's on spiritual matters, history, and science. All right, Matthew 22:37 says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and what? That's right, all your mind." So, of course, this includes theology, but today it's also going to include science. You know, there's a lot of science in the Bible. The media, however, likes to portray it that it is science versus the Bible, as if the two are mutually exclusive. But that is not the case at all. We love science, and in fact, we think science and the Bible support each other overwhelmingly. Now, did you know that there are two types of science? One is operational and the other historical, and it really is worth kind of understanding the differences between the two. So, I am an avid user of operational science, and that's generally what we think of when we think of science. So this is the scientific method that we learned in junior high. When I'm at the racetrack, I use operational science to continually experiment with how much grip I have and how much my braking performance, and then I make subtle changes as I go along. In the fighter squadron, I use a scientific method to develop tactics based on the new technology. If we got something new, we would try it, and if it worked, we'd tell everybody else about it. If it didn't work, we'd move on to something else. Now, the F-16, it was $10,000 an hour per airplane, and ultimately, we were talking about life and death, so we had to be right on the science. Well, we also trust operational science. In fact, a commercial airline flight is safer than your drive to and from church today. Again, operational science is good. It's what gave us computers, modern science. It's what put the man on the moon. All that is operational science. So let's contrast that with historical science. So historical science, also called forensic science, it is investigating something that happened in the past. It is unobservable. It is not repeatable. So for example, let's say that you believe fish sprouted arms and legs over millions of years and eventually evolved into land animals. Can you do an experiment on that? Can you test it? Is it repeatable? No. And it's not observable. So none of those things that we see in operational science. So you need to interpret the evidence that you have in the present and then make up a plausible story about what happened in the past. It's like being a detective or a CSI agent arriving on a murder scene and trying to figure out what happened. You have to fill in the gaps, and there's lots of gaps of information, and you fill those in with your assumptions. And these assumptions are also things that you cannot directly test. In fact, these assumptions are based on your worldview. Now, a worldview is simply the lens that we use on how to perceive our world. It dictates how we interpret the evidence that we see. So do we see the world based on the Bible or something else? Unfortunately, modern science has taken on a worldview of naturalism and materialism. And what this means is that everything must be explained by natural processes, and God absolutely cannot exist. So in summary, operational science, it's objective, it's black and white, it's repeatable, it's testable. Historical science is subjective, and it greatly is shaped by our worldview. Now, the two leading worldviews are evolution and creation, and they are directly opposed to each other. So, just kind of a summarization, evolution, we're talking Big Bang Theory, millions of years, life spontaneously came from nothing, we evolved from bacteria. Creation, on the other hand, says that the Bible is the source of authority and truth. God created via his miracles, Adam and Eve, Noah's flood, those are all true, and Jesus resurrected himself after 3 days. So those are the two contrasts. So let's dig a little bit deeper into this. So I will ask for your hands to be raised on this one. This is a short quiz. Which worldview, evolution or creation, has the most evidence on how the world was created? So first, evolution. Who has the most evidence? All right, I see a couple hands. What about creation? Who has the most evidence for creation? All right, well, I'm going to ask this question another way. What if you looked into a microscope? What do you see? Does it matter where your worldview is? No, we're all going to see the same thing. You see, the evidence is the same. It's the worldview that's the interpretation that's different. So we all have the same evidence. The difference is simply in how they're interpreted. Now, we've been programmed to think that fossils are millions of years old. But again, this is simply a worldview interpretation of this evidence. The evidence does not speak for itself. These worldviews, it's really like they're competing for acceptance as if we're in a courtroom. Both attorneys, we have the same evidence. They're both biased. They're committed to their worldview, and they're going to make compelling arguments. The naturalist or the evolutionist says this fossil is best explained by evolution over millions of years and there is no God. And the creationist is going to go, no, no, no. Yeah, I see the fossil, but that's not the right interpretation. The better interpretation is that this fossil is the evidence of Noah's flood. Well, they can't both be right, and guess who the jury is? It's you. It's your kids and your grandkids. They're the ones that are going to determine who's right. Now, how can the jury, again, your kids and grandkids, make an informed decision if she's only heard one side of the story? You see, 1 or 2 hours on Sunday is no match for everything else that we're bombarded with Monday through Saturday. I'm talking school, science fiction movies, social media, all of that. It really is a lot. Now, that said, I believe that we observe enough in the present to know that the Bible is true. But yes, it is hard to get that message out. So we're going to explore some evidences, and just like in a courtroom, let's have the Genesis account, see if it can challenge the evolutionary worldview. All right, where is this? Believe it or not, it's America. Yes, there's no guardrails. This is the Grand Canyon, and that's my wife in 2001. So I was taught that these layers in the Grand Canyon took millions of years to form. And that's based on our present day observation of very, very slow sedimentation. Think about the dust that you see on your windshield. And then this tiny little river took millions and millions of years to carve this huge canyon. So this is 500 million years of sediment and erosion. Well, that's one interpretation. Let's see if we can perhaps have another one. So did you know that there is overwhelming evidence that these massive layers were laid down in rapid succession by sediments in water? So we find rock layers across the entire globe, spanning continents. I was just on vacation, and this is Santorini in Greece. You can also see the rock layers here. So it is all across our globe. And what do we find in these rock layers? Besides rocks, yes, fossils. Fossils are dead things, right? Okay, remember that. We're going to come back to it. So, does the Bible record anything that could give these results? Yes. Yeah, good job. We have some strivers on the front row. Noah's worldwide flood. Now, in question and answers, I've had people come up to me and go, there is not enough water on the earth to cover the entire world. It can't be a worldwide flood. Well, I like to show this slide. This is 7th grade earth science. The world is covered by 70% water. And these oceans are really, really deep. So there's plenty of water to account for Noah's flood. In fact, if you took the mountains and flattened them and took our deep oceans and brought them up so the earth was a perfect sphere, we have enough water to cover the earth almost 2 miles deep. So clearly there is enough water to account for Noah's flood. Now the Bible says that the flood covered all the land, including the mountains. And if that's the case, wouldn't you expect to find aquatic marine fossils, think clams, and sedimentary layers in the highest mountain ranges, including Mount Everest? Well, that's exactly what we find. So the evidence in the present demonstrates that these layers were all once under oceans, just as God's words describe. In Psalms 104, it says, the waters were standing above the mountains rose, and the valleys sank down. Again, there's lots of geology that supports Noah's flood. There's a lot of examples. I'm just going to list one more here, and this is folded rock layers, one of many of the phenomena. So the evolution worldview would say that this represents millions of years. But you see the rock layers are all folded. How can solid rock fold and bend and yet not crack, break, or melt? It doesn't make any sense. So perhaps a more plausible explanation is a creation worldview, that all these layers were established in days and just weeks, and while they were still soft before they turned into rock, that's when they were disturbed. You're the jury. What makes the most sense? And again, this is just one of many evidences that I could bring up. Now, speaking of layers, we are taught that each thin little layer of sedimentation takes years to thousands of years to form. Well, if that's the case, you see these 24 feet of rock layers above this gentleman. How long do you think it took to form? So I'm going to give you part of the answer The number 3. Is it 3 million? Is it 3,000 years? What if I told you it was 3 hours? That's right. This rock layer, 24 feet, formed in 3 hours. And here's the whole story. On May 18th, 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted. And that bottom layer was all created in 9 hours. Now, less than a month later, there was another eruption, and that's where we get that 24 feet of sedimentation. It was laid down in just 3 hours. So what you see in the slide right now all happened in only a matter of a cumulative 12 hours. Imagine what a global flood can do in a year. Now, 18 months later, there was another event. It was a giant mud flow, and it did add another layer to the top, but it also created this huge canyon. Now, if we did not see this canyon happen, we might approach it and go, oh, look at all the sedimentary layers. Millions of years to make the canyon, and look at that tiny little river. It must have taken millions of years for it to form the canyon. But we know that's not true because we saw it happen in one day. Now, contrast that with the Grand Canyon, which has very similar features to the canyon Mount St. Helens. You see, the Grand Canyon shows lots of evidence that points to rapid erosion and, rapid deposition followed by rapid erosion. You see, the biblical view makes sense of what we see. Now, we've been talking about science, but ladies and gentlemen, this really is a heart matter. In fact, the Bible predicted that people would one day deny Noah's flood. 2 Peter chapter 3 says, "Scoffers will come in the last days, following their own sinful desires. For they deliberately overlook this fact, that the world that then existed was deluged with water and perished." You know, earlier we established that fossils are in the rock layers. Well, if the rock layers came from the flood, then doesn't that mean that the fossils are also quite young? So who's heard that fossils take a long time to form? All right, most of us, right? That's what we all got. Well, I'd like to challenge that today. So this is what we're taught. If you go open a textbook or go into a museum, you're going to see David the dinosaur. He dies and sinks perfectly intact to the bottom of the ocean or the pond. And then over millions of years is slowly buried, turns into a fossil, and then waits around for either erosion or for a dig to be uncovered. Is that pretty much what everyone understands about fossils? Yes, thank you. So I'd like to challenge that. What do we really observe? So think back to the last time you watched the Discovery Channel and they were showing the bottom of the ocean. Were there hundreds of dead animals waiting to be slowly buried? No, it's a pretty clean place, the bottom of the ocean. So when an animal dies, what we observe is the food chain in action. We've got big scavengers all the way down to the little scavengers of bacteria, and they're all getting lunch from this dead animal. In fact, according to laws of chemistry, bones deteriorate in seawater. So after a short time, you're not going to have anything left of anything. And that's why we see such a clean seafloor. So, is there a more plausible explanation for the abundant, well-preserved fossils, sometimes including bones and soft tissue, that we find today? Yes, there is. So, let me tell you a story based on Genesis. So here's Freddy the fish. He's swimming around, he's having a good day, and unfortunately, he encounters a cataclysmic event like the Noah's flood. And he is rapidly buried, instantly. The good news is, it was a quick death. And then he sits around, fossilized fairly quickly, and is available for us to find him years later as a fossil. So again, rapid burial and fossils form quickly. Let's take a look at that. Here's some actual fossils. These are 250 fish, all facing the same direction, seemingly to be actively swimming in a school. And they were all buried together, again, instantaneously. This is an ichthyosaur. It is an extinct animal, but you will be amazed at this fossil. What do you see happening here? Of course, I shouldn't be in the middle of it. That's right. This mother is giving birth. So she is snap frozen in time in the birth process because, again, she was instantly covered in sediment. And then finally, this poor guy, he was buried while eating lunch. Now, my mom always told me to take small bites. So these fossils, evidence, doesn't fit the die of old age and sink to the bottom and slowly get covered story, right? All right, so we've established rock layers were laid down quickly. We talked about how fossils were buried quickly, but do fossils, the actual fossilization process, does that take a long time? What do you guys think? Well, since I'm up here, probably not. So we've learned that under the right conditions of water, sediment, and a lot of pressure, fossils can form very quickly. In fact, modern labs, so this is operational science now, is made fossils and coal in less than a month. So a couple of examples. This is a fossilized hat. It was buried in volcanic ash, and in about 20 years, it evolved from a soft hat to a hard hat. All right, this teddy bear, in the right conditions, it turned to stone in 3 to 5 months, completely calcified into a rock. All right, so I think we've established that fossils can actually form quite quickly. All right, we've seen that Noah's flood very nicely explains massive rock layers across the entire globe, animals perishing from rapid burial, quick fossilization processes, and the fact that we see fossils on all continents and even in the highest mountains. Our world is not millions of years old. So what we see in God's world agrees with what we see in God's Word, or what we read in God's Word. The Bible can be trusted not just on salvation matters, but also science. So has anyone been surprised today to learn that there is so much evidence supporting the Genesis account? And we are just getting started. So I bet when we walk outside today, we will never look at our amazing world the same. All right, I'd like for us to take a closer look at why the age of the earth is so important. So how many have heard the idea that each day of creation represents millions of years? Yes, we've all heard that. Very popular, again, this is that theistic evolution mindset. Well, what's wrong with millions of years? Why is that even a big deal? I mean, the Bible is a book of morality, right? Why take a potentially divisive stance on an inconsequential subject? Well, we're going to find out why. Adding millions of years will impact some important doctrines in the Bible. All right, this is the genealogy of Adam all the way to Christ. Now, as soon as I said the word genealogy, 3 guys on the front row immediately went to sleep. All right, I get it. Genealogies in the Bible, it is a sure cure for insomnia. However, it is extremely important because they are powerful evidences that the earth is not millions of years old. These details show that the Bible is telling us real history. Now, the Bible gives us a reliable time span from Adam to Jesus of about 4,000 years. And then post-flood, people and events can even be fact-checked. Archaeology consistently supports the biblical historical narrative. So if we have this tightly defined timeline, adding up the genealogies, the king's reigns, significant events, we've got pretty much 6,000 years from Adam to present day. Where are we going to put millions of years? Are you going to stick it before King David? Probably not. Where does it go? That's right. It's going to go in the beginning, all the way before Adam. But that's a problem. You see, when God gave us the 10 Commandments, He reminded us that everything was made in 6 days. The Bible is consistent that these 6 days are 6 literal days. So after 6 literal days of creation, we have Adam and Eve walking in the garden. And God said this was what? It was very good. That's right. And He gave Adam and Eve a warning. He said, do not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because why? What's going to happen? That's right. When you eat of it, you will surely die. So at this point, Adam and Eve are in paradise. There's been no death, no disease, no decay. Now, if you want to put in millions of years prior to Adam, we have a problem, because that means Adam and Eve have been standing on a fossil graveyard of suffering, disease, and death. Now, I can't see God, who embodies the very nature of good, calling this very good. Can you? I would say this kind of makes God out to be a monster. Do we really think that a perfect and loving God used millions of years of death and random mutations as a mechanism to create his perfect world? Absolutely not. The Bible is very clear. Death was a direct result of Adam's sin, period. Romans 5:12 says, "Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all men because all sinned." In 1 Corinthians 15, we read, "For as by a man came death, by a man has also come the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive." You see, until you understand the bad news in Genesis, you can't really understand the good news in the New Testament. I appeal to the jury. Should we take Genesis literally? Well, let's look at this logically. If death existed before sin, then death is not the payment for sin. If death is not the payment for sin, then Jesus' death does not pay our sin debt. So should we take Genesis literally? Absolutely. Salvation is directly and intractably linked to the literal story of Adam and Eve and their original sin. Now, atheists absolutely understand this and get it. This is Frank Zindler. The belief in evolution logically eradicates the gospel message. So this is what he has to say. The most devastating thing that biology did to Christianity was the discovery of biological evolution. Now that we know Adam and Eve were never real people, the central myth of Christianity is destroyed. If there was never an Adam and Eve, then there was never an original sin. Again, ladies and gentlemen, this is a hard issue, even though we're talking about science. People don't want to be accountable to God and his morality. 2 Timothy 4 says, "For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths." Our culture is gathering teachers and textbooks to indoctrinate us on evolution. So we don't have to be accountable to God and his moral laws. Evolution's popularity may be surprising, but the Bible predicted it. Now, if you're like me, you're thinking, if science supports the Bible so well, then why don't we hear about it? Why don't we read about it? Can this many scientists all be wrong? And I believe it. That's a fair question. So I've always heard myself, science will follow the facts wherever it leads us. But now we have to say, unless that points to God. So this is Dr. Scott Todd, and he says, even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, God, such a hypothesis is excluded from science because it is not naturalistic. So again, this is a heart issue, not a head issue. But does that really make sense to completely exclude God? Well, let's put this to the test. We're going to play a quick game, and it's called Intelligent Design or Random Acts of Nature, and you get to be the judges. Let's find out what makes the most logical sense. So here we are walking along a trail, and you see an object on the ground. Now, for those of you who can't see it, I'll blow it up a little bit. Again, is this an object of design or a random acts of nature? Are you going to pick this up and go, oh, look, what random accidents with no purpose created? Or are you going to say, hey, did somebody lose a watch? You see, we intuitively learn to distinguish design from random nature. It's actually very easy. So with that in mind, let's look at another example. Let's look into a microscope. And on the right side, you're going to see DNA. That's right. This is the most dense and complex information storage system we know of in the universe, more than any of our best computers. And it comes with other nanomachines required to copy, translate, and repair it. On the left side is an ATP synthase nanomachine. We have many of these machines in absolutely every single living cell on Earth, and we cannot sustain life without it. And they're nearly 100% efficient. So both of these are vastly more complicated than a watch. And yet, so many modern scientists assume that they materialize by unguided random processes apart from God. It's baffling, right? But there is a reason. Because they patently refuse to allow for the existence of God. This is Professor Lewontin from Harvard University. He says, we take the side of evolutionary science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just-so stories, because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a defined foot in the door. You know, we're taught that science is objective, but it is anything but objective, to the point of willfully denying the obvious for the sake of maintaining this millions of years worldview. So please do not think that what we're exposed to is neutral. It's not. Creation Ministry International exists to equip believers and provide resources to demolish arguments that are set up against our kids, our culture, that prevent them from knowing our Creator, Jesus Christ. You know, our culture and public education deliberately only show us one side of the story. Most people believe in evolution simply because that's all they've ever heard. Now, remember our Fallout documentary? Remember those statistics? Does anybody not think that we're engaged in a battle for souls? We all need Jesus, and we all need to know that the Bible can be trusted. Genesis is foundational to our ability to effectively share the gospel. All right, this has been a lot to grasp if you're hearing this for the first time, and I admit it can be overwhelming. I certainly remember the first time that I was ever exposed to this type of evidence. Excuse the pun, but no kidding, it rocked my world. Although it's really hard to let go of these long-held beliefs, we really want the Bible to be true, right? I mean, reading Genesis as true history gives us much more clarity to the rest of the Bible and to what we see when we look outdoors. Now, we've just scratched the surface on the mountain of evidence that supports creation. There really is so much more, and you can see a lot of these subjects that, again, we haven't even touched on today. So CMI's vision is to have an army, and personally an air force, of believers defending and sharing their faith. Now, I imagine you want to know more and be better prepared to answer more questions. So, was this information that we heard today straightforward? It is. Can you see yourself sharing this information? Now, next weekend, do you think you're going to remember everything that I just said today? Probably not. So I want to get a little practical with you guys. You may have seen the bookstore as you walked in today. This is in response to years of church members asking us to bring resources with us. Our number one resource is, and this we've received the most testimonies of people coming to know Christ through our magazine, Creation Magazine. It's in 110 different countries. It is a quarterly magazine, and it's the most read magazine of its kind. There's no paid advertising. It's 56 pages. It's in color. It's easy to understand. There's a children's section in every single magazine, 4 pages of the children's section. And you can get it on a digital version that can be shared on 5 different devices. So I'm going to ask the volunteers to come around and start passing out the sign-up forms. If you liked a subscription, you can option for either 1 or a 2-year subscription. All right, today, if you ask for a subscription or sign up for a subscription, you walk out with the latest issue in your hands today, and you'll also be signed up for a monthly newsletter. And that'll have different additional articles and some updates. If you sign up for a 2-year subscription, you're going to get 2 free DVDs, and that also comes with a streamable option. I know not everybody has a DVD player. We get you. And those two DVDs, one is the Darwin documentary. It basically follows Darwin along and asked a question: if Darwin knew what we know today about genetics and the complexity of a cell, would he still believe in his own theory? And then the second DVD is the Fallout DVD. You can actually listen to the students and what they have to say about why they're leaving the church. All right, so while the Creation Magazine subscription sign-up sheets are making their rounds, I have a couple more examples. And some of these are people's favorite pieces of evidence. All right, so I've heard, doesn't scientific dating methods provide indisputable evidence for millions, if not billions of years? Well, what do you think based on what we've already talked about today? Yeah, we're going to challenge that. So scientists sent 3 samples from a volcanic lava dome with a known eruption date to be dated via the potassium-argon method. So we have the whole rock, and then 2 minerals that were extracted from that same rock. So it's all from the same place, same age. And they came back with 3 different dates. One was 350,000 years old, the other was 900,000, and this is pretty normal to get a range, 1.7 to 2.8 million years. So which one do you think was right? Well, would you be surprised if I said none of them? This rock was 10 years old. It came from the lava dome out of Mount St. Helens. We know when this rock was created. So if these dating methods can be so incorrect and inconsistent of a rock of known age, then doesn't this bring into question all the assumptions for these dating methods? All right, now remember how I said archaeology continues to support the biblical history? Well, new modern and scientific discoveries do the same. So you guys are going to love this one. In the mid-1990s, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, she's an evolutionist working at Montana State University. She had a smelly T-Rex bone, and she had to break the bone in order to ship it. And she said, and these are her own words, her discovery was beyond belief. She found red blood cells in dinosaur bones. Think about that. Red blood cells in dinosaur bones. You know, this would be pretty impressive even at 4,500 years old. So this is her quote, her words. She said, "I got goosebumps. It was exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone. But of course, I couldn't believe it. I said to the lab technicians, these bones, after all, are 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long?" And I say, yeah, that's a great question. How could they? So later they dissolved the bony matrix, and underneath was unfossilized, soft, fibrous tissue. It was flexible and resilient when stretched and returned to its original shape. They also found transparent blood vessels, and you could squeeze out its content of a dinosaur bone. Does this look 65 million years old to you? Now, Dr. Schweitzer said that it was shocking. Yeah, I agree. And she did not believe it until they had done the experiment, again, operational science, done the experiment 17 times. Now, honestly, I don't blame her. It is very hard to let go of a worldview that we've been clinging to, despite the overwhelming evidence. So I have another interpretation of this. It's not 65 million years old, probably about 4,500 years old from the flood. So I hope you can see how exciting this information is and how easy it is to share. Now, I said there would be a test. If you have a creation question, where are you going to go? That's right, creation.com. Super, you guys are awesome. You remembered it. Now, in addition to the magazine, there's some other recommendations we have if you want to get more information. And the first thing is our starter pack. It comes with the Creation Answers book. This is 60 of the most often asked questions, and they're answered. You also get a book of Refuting Evolution. It is the best-selling creation book of all time. And it dismantles evolution and replaces it with the truth of creation. And then finally, there's a Genesis video. You can also get this as streaming. And it basically is a presentation of what you heard today. We have a fantastic documentary on DVD. It won second place at the Christian Worldview Film Festival. It's Evolution, Achilles' Heel. 15 PhD scientists eloquently explain how evolution cannot be true. And then we also have 2 curriculums you can pick up. The first one is the Genesis Academy. It is a 12-week series for adults, and we have a 33-week series for kind of middle school and up called Rock Solid Bible Curriculum, and that is our newest curriculum. All right, so in closing, let me remind you of this verse that we started with. Let's equip ourselves so the next time somebody asks us a question, we have a credible and logical response. Let us be confident and show other people that the Bible is true, starting with the very first verse. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I'll be in the back in our bookstore if you have any questions. Thank you, Pastor Aaron, for letting me speak in your church today. Thanks again. 45 minutes and 52 seconds.